There's something quietly heartbreaking about spending your whole life searching for something you've already had, like chasing the horizon, always running, never realizing that the stillness you crave is right where you stand. Most people think awakening is about becoming someone else, someone wiser, calmer, more spiritual. But the Buddha taught something far more radical. He said that you are not broken. You are not missing some secret ingredient. At the core of your being, beneath all the self-doubt, anxiety, and endless striving, there is already a radiant, peaceful presence, a part of you that has never been touched by fear, failure, or shame. And the tragedy? Most of us never stop long enough to notice it. This video isn't about adding more to your life. It's about removing the veil. Together, we're going to explore what the Buddha called Buddha nature, and how recognizing it will change the way you relate to your thoughts, your emotions, and even your suffering. What we're about to talk about is more than philosophy. It's an invitation to stop searching and start seeing. If anything we've done on this channel has ever helped you pause, breathe, or reflect, even for a moment, then there's one simple and free way you can support what we're doing here. Just hit the subscribe button, that's it. It helps more than you know. And whatever you do, don't skip this video. Every part of it builds towards something that may shift how you see yourself entirely. Let's walk this path together and see what's been waiting in the stillness all along. We all have moments when we pause and wonder, if I've been meditating, reading, and trying to live mindfully, why do I still get irritated so easily? Why do I still feel so far away from peace? If I'm really on a spiritual path, why do I still feel stuck? And when we hear a teaching like, you already have Buddha nature, it can feel both beautiful and incredibly confusing. It sounds too simple to be true. After all, how can someone who struggles with overthinking, anxiety, and self-doubt possibly be enlightened at the core? This is where Buddhism takes an unexpected turn. The Buddha didn't promise that practice would make you become something new. He said it would help you remember what you've always been. That's a huge difference. You're not here to build yourself up from scratch. You're here to uncover what's already there, beneath the layers of conditioning and fear. But this simple truth often leads to big, uncomfortable questions. And that's okay. Even the most devoted monks and scholars have wrestled with this. One of the most common questions people ask when they first hear about Buddha nature is, if I'm already enlightened, then why do I need to meditate? That's not just a good question. It's the question that sparked debates across centuries of Buddhist history. And it's the kind of question that has no quick one-size-fits-all answer. Because the moment you start thinking about enlightenment as something you're either at or not at, you're missing the subtlety of what the Buddha was pointing toward. Think of it like this: you walk into a dark room and flip on the light. The objects in the room were already there. The light just let you see them. Meditation is that light switch. It doesn't create your Buddha nature, it reveals it. And the thing is, sometimes we need to sit in that darkness long enough to appreciate what the light actually shows. Without that contrast, without that experience of not knowing, of not seeing, we wouldn't even know what recognition felt like. He never said your anger, confusion, or sadness made you unworthy. He said they were clouds passing through the sky, not the sky itself. The thoughts that tell you you're not good enough. They're not your nature. The emotions that shake you, they don't define you. Underneath all of it is something still, something awake, something unchanging. And that's what we mean when we talk about Buddha nature. It's the part of you that's never been broken, never been lost, and never needed fixing. It's just been waiting to be seen. For most of us, the spiritual path begins with the sense that something is missing. We look at our lives and feel like we're falling short in some way, too anxious, too distracted, too lost. And so we turn to meditation, mindfulness retreats, books and teachings, hoping to find a way to become more whole. We chase after peace like it's a reward that will come someday if we just do enough inner work. But what if that whole mindset of trying to become something more is actually part of the illusion the Buddha warned us about. In the early scriptures, the Buddha didn't describe enlightenment as something you achieve like a trophy at the end of a race. He described it as a kind of recognition, a remembering, a waking up to what has always been true, and that's what makes the concept of Buddha nature so powerful. It suggests that enlightenment isn't a future destination. It's your original state, your true self, not the self that gets tangled in opinions and roles and fears, but the self that quietly witnesses it all, without judgment. That's why this teaching is so revolutionary. It doesn't ask you to become something else. It invites you to return to what you already are. And that changes everything. It shifts your entire relationship with spiritual practice. It's no longer about climbing a mountain to reach some perfect state. It's about realizing you were never apart from it to begin with. The path doesn't lead somewhere else. It brings you back home. This is why the Buddha used metaphors like the jewel hidden in the mud or the clear sky behind the clouds. He knew we'd get stuck identifying with the dirt and the storm. He knew we'd forget that the brilliance and stillness were always there. And so, he pointed us inward, not to search harder, but to see more clearly. That clarity is what transforms suffering. It doesn't erase life's challenges, but it helps you meet them from a place of deep, steady knowing. Now, this might sound abstract at first, but think about how your life would feel if you truly believed that nothing is wrong with you, that at your core, you're already whole. You're not a problem to be solved. You're not some damaged thing that needs constant fixing. You're not your worst mistake or your loudest insecurity. You're the awareness behind all of it, the one who notices the storm without being the storm. Buddha nature is not about becoming peaceful someday. It's about noticing that peace is already here, quietly holding everything, even when your mind feels chaotic. And when you approach your practice with that understanding, something shifts. Meditation stops being a struggle to achieve silence. It becomes a soft return to the awareness that's always present. Mindfulness stops being a task on your to-do list. It becomes a gentle remembering of who you really are beneath the noise. Most people walk through life convinced that something is wrong with them. Not just a little wrong, but fundamentally flawed in some quiet, heavy way they can't quite name. You can feel it in the way we try to fix ourselves. Another book, another retreat, another version of ourselves we hope will finally be worthy. But the Buddha didn't see us that way. He didn't teach that we're broken and need to be repaired. He taught that we are already whole, but that our true nature is hidden, not lost. In one of the most powerful metaphors found in the Tathagatagarbha Sutra, the Buddha compared our inner nature to a radiant jewel wrapped in filthy rags and buried deep in a pile of garbage. Now think about that for a moment. What does that image stir in you? It's not just poetic, it's piercing. He wasn't trying to say you need to become a jewel. He was saying that you are the jewel. The problem isn't that you lack something. It's that you've been covered by layers of confusion, pain and misperception for so long that you've forgotten what lies beneath. That's why Buddhist practice isn't really about becoming enlightened. It's about uncovering what's already there. Meditation isn't a way to build something new. It's a method of peeling back the rags. Mindfulness isn't polishing the jewel. It's learning to see through the dirt. The deeper message here is that enlightenment isn't far away. It's intimate. It's quiet. It's always been close, closer than your thoughts, closer than your name, closer than any identity you've ever held. Buddha nature is not a philosophy to memorize. It's a recognition, a turning inward, a quiet return. And the more we rest in that recognition, the more compassion begins to rise, not only for ourselves, but for everyone around us. Because suddenly, we see the jewel in others too, even when they can't see it in themselves. Most of us spend years trying to fix ourselves. We think we're too emotional, too lazy, too anxious, too flawed. We believe that if we just read the right books, practice enough meditation, or finally heal all our wounds, we'll become worthy, calm, confident, enlightened. But what if that entire mindset is upside down? What if the Buddha was never trying to help you become someone else, but instead trying to help you remember who you already are? That's exactly what the teaching of Buddha nature reveals. It's not about chasing perfection. It's about uncovering the brilliance that's already within you, right now, beneath all the mental noise and emotional layers. The Buddha once used the image of a pure, shining jewel wrapped in filthy rags. No matter how dirty the wrappings, the jewel itself remains untouched, radiant and whole. That jewel is your true nature. And the layers of conditioning, self-judgment and fear, they're just coverings, temporary, not who you are. This core essence, the awakened nature within you, is described in Buddhist teachings as having 3 timeless qualities: purity, stability and joy. These aren't traits you develop through effort. They're the essence of what you've always been. Let's take a closer look at each one. The first is purity, and this is a big one. When the Buddha said your nature is pure, he didn't mean morally pure or perfect in some rigid sense. He meant untouched, unstained by your past, your mistakes, or the things you regret. Think about that. No matter what you've done, no matter how lost you've felt, there's a part of you that has never been damaged. It's like the sky. Storms may rage, clouds may block the sun, but the sky itself remains untouched. Your true nature is the same. All the shame, guilt, and stories you carry, they are not the final word on who you are. Deep down, you are still whole, still untouched. The second quality is unchanging. This can be hard to grasp because so much of life is constantly shifting. Our moods swing, our thoughts race, our identities evolve. One day we feel clear and peaceful, the next day we're drowning in doubt. But Buddha taught that beneath all that movement, there's something that doesn't change. A stillness, a stable awareness. Your thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, but the awareness that notices them, that presence has been with you since the beginning. It doesn't age, it doesn't panic, it simply watches. Like a mountain that remains unmoved no matter what the weather brings. That's your Buddha nature, unchanging, steady, and always available no matter how chaotic your outer life becomes. And finally, there's joy, not the kind of joy that depends on everything going right, not the fleeting happiness we get from accomplishments or compliments. This is something deeper, the joy of simply existing, the peace of being completely at home within yourself. When Buddha spoke of nirvana, he didn't describe it as a boring emptiness. He described it as a state of profound peace, freedom, and bliss. That bliss is your natural state. But we've forgotten it because we've been chasing satisfaction in the wrong places. It's like being so busy digging for treasure that we don't realize we're already sitting on it. We spend so much of our lives trying to become someone better, stronger, wiser. We set goals, fix our flaws, compare ourselves to others, and measure our worth by how much we achieve. But quietly, behind all that effort, there's a whisper, a subtle sense that no matter how much we do, it's never enough. That maybe, just maybe, there's something fundamentally wrong with us that needs fixing. And so we keep running, toward enlightenment, toward healing, toward perfection, believing it's out there somewhere just beyond the next success, the next spiritual breakthrough, the next quiet moment on the cushion. But the Buddha offered a completely different perspective. He said that our suffering doesn't come from being broken or incomplete. It comes from not recognizing what's already within us. Beneath all the layers of identity, beneath the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, lies something unshakable and whole. And that something is your Buddha nature. Not a future state you need to earn, not a title granted after years of discipline, but a presence already here, already awake, already enough. Think about how often you believe you're not doing enough, not meditating right, not kind enough, not focused enough. These thoughts seem helpful at first. they push us to grow, but they also reinforce a dangerous illusion that your worth is conditional, that you are not already worthy of peace, and that illusion becomes the foundation of what we think of as the self. We create a personality around our wounds, around our flaws, around our failures, and we wear it like armor. But what if that armor is the only thing blocking the light? Buddha nature is not about denying your emotions or pretending everything is perfect. It's about realizing that your anger, your grief, your confusion, they are clouds, passing experiences, and the sky behind them, the awareness that sees them come and go, is untouched. That awareness is not trying to be spiritual, it simply is, and it's been with you from the very beginning. This is not easy work. The illusion of self is deeply ingrained. But Buddhism invites us to question it. Every time you notice your thoughts pulling you into self-doubt, pause, ask, who is thinking this? Who is feeling this? And then feel into the space behind the thought. That space, that witnessing presence, is the real you. Not the character in the story, but the one aware of the story. Most people think Buddhism is a calm, quiet tradition, full of serene monks, peaceful temples, and silent meditations. And yes, there's truth in that. But what many don't realize is that throughout history, Buddhist teachings have also stirred up passionate debate, even controversy, especially when it comes to the idea of Buddha nature. When the Buddha revealed this teaching, that every sentient being already possesses the enlightened mind, it wasn't just a gentle insight, it was a spiritual earthquake. It made people question everything they thought they understood about the path, the practice, and the purpose of it all. Just think about it. If you're already enlightened at your core, what's the point of all this effort? Why meditate for years? Why follow precepts or study sutras? To some, this teaching sounded like it made the path irrelevant. And that's exactly why it disrupted centuries of tradition. Buddhist teachers who had devoted their entire lives to discipline and renunciation were suddenly being told that enlightenment wasn't something earned, but something revealed. You can imagine how that felt. For many it was threatening. For others it was liberating. In the Theravada tradition, which focuses deeply on monastic discipline and gradual progress, this idea didn't sit well. They acknowledged something like Buddha nature, but in their view it was potential, not actuality. Like a seed that could grow into a tree but only with the right care. Enlightenment, they taught, was the result of immense effort, years of ethical living, focused meditation, and deep insight. Saying you were already enlightened in their eyes sounded lazy or even misleading. After all, the Buddha himself practiced diligently for years before awakening. Why would he have done that if we were all already there? That's when things got really interesting, because once you say everyone has Buddha nature, it raises a deeper question. Who doesn't? If even a thief, a murderer, or someone filled with hatred still possesses this core of enlightenment, what does that say about morality, about justice, about practice itself? This teaching made people reevaluate not just what it means to be enlightened, but what it means to be human. It brought compassion to the center. If I know you carry Buddha nature even when you're acting from confusion or pain, I'm less likely to judge you, more likely to forgive you. At the same time, there was real concern. Some worried that if people believed they were already enlightened, they'd stop trying, that they'd fall into what's called spiritual bypassing, using nice words like wholeness or inner peace to avoid actually doing the hard work of healing and growth. Buddha himself warned against complacency. He said that while your true nature is pure, you still have to clear away the illusions that cover it, like polishing a mirror, not because the mirror is broken, but because it's dusty. When we think about Buddhism, it's easy to assume it's one single path, one teaching, one practice, one idea of enlightenment. But the truth is, as the Buddha's teachings spread across time and cultures, they took on many forms. Just like rivers flowing from the same mountain spring, The traditions that emerged carried the same water, but moved through different landscapes. Each school of Buddhism, Theravada, Mahayana, Zen, Vajrayana, looked at the nature of enlightenment through its own lens. And when it came to the concept of Buddha nature, their interpretations didn't always agree. But beneath those differences, there's something astonishing, a shared, unshakable insight into the essence of who we truly are. Let's begin with the Mahayana tradition, which embraced Buddha nature like a heartbeat. Mahayana teachings often described it as the core truth hidden beneath the illusions we carry. They believed it wasn't just that we have the potential to become enlightened, it's that we are already enlightened in our deepest being. That recognition became the foundation for many Mahayana schools, influencing how they approached meditation, ethics, and even compassion. The Yogacara school, for instance, explained Buddha nature as something that unfolds gradually, like a lotus flower, revealing one petal at a time. Each layer we peel back in meditation or self-inquiry brings us closer to what was always present. We're not building something new, we're unveiling what's always been whole. Now contrast that with the Theravada school, which took a more cautious stance. Theravada practitioners deeply respected the Buddha's original teachings and emphasized discipline, mindfulness, and personal responsibility. For them, Buddha nature wasn't a guarantee, it was a possibility. They believed that the path to enlightenment was real and achievable, but it required sustained effort and practice. In their view, to say we are already enlightened could risk spiritual laziness or confusion. After all, if you think there's nothing left to do, why sit on the cushion? Why renounce craving? So they focused instead on cultivating the conditions for awakening, like planting seeds in fertile soil and patiently tending the garden. Then came Zen, which took the conversation in a whole new direction. The Zen tradition didn't just talk about Buddha nature, it used it as the center of the path. Zen masters would often challenge their students with cryptic phrases or sudden actions, not to confuse them, but to jolt them out of their usual patterns of thought. The goal wasn't to explain Buddha nature, but to point directly to it. Dogen, one of the greatest Zen teachers, famously said, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things." In other words, the very act of looking inward dissolves the illusion of separation, and what's left is Buddha nature, shining clearly through. The Tibetan tradition brought yet another perspective. It integrated both the gradual approach of Theravada and the sudden recognition emphasized by Zen. Tibetan Buddhism has incredibly detailed maps of the mind and practices, designed to help practitioners peel back the layers of delusion. Yet at the same time, they also teach Dzogchen and Mahamudra, methods that point directly to the mind's pure, luminous nature, your Buddha nature. They teach that what you're looking for is not outside you. It's the very awareness with which you're looking. In Tibetan texts, Buddha nature is often described as primordial awareness, the mind's original, unchanging clarity that's been with you all along. Despite these differences in tone and method, all these traditions share something profound. Whether they speak of slow cultivation or sudden awakening, they all point to the same truth. You are not lacking. Your true nature is not something you have to invent or import. It's already here, waiting to be seen. Even if you're tangled in confusion or buried in old pain, the jewel within remains untouched. Most people sit down to meditate with the quiet hope that it will make them better, more calm, more focused, more spiritual. And at first glance, that makes sense. Life feels chaotic, our minds feel out of control, and meditation promises to fix all that. But here's where it gets interesting. In Buddhist teaching, especially when we talk about Buddha nature, the goal of meditation isn't to become anything at all. It's not about self-improvement. It's about uncovering something that's already there. And that completely changes the way we look at practice. The Buddha used a powerful metaphor. Your true nature is like a clear mirror, but it's covered with dust. That dust is your thoughts, your distractions, your stories about who you are. Meditation, then, is not polishing the mirror to make it shinier. It's gently wiping away the dust so you can finally see what's always been beneath. The key difference is this. In one version, you're fixing yourself. In the other, you're revealing yourself. That small shift in perspective turns meditation from a chore into something deeply sacred. When you sit down thinking, I need to become enlightened, every thought that pops up feels like failure. Every restless moment becomes a reason to doubt yourself. You believe that stillness means progress, and that mental noise means you're doing it wrong. But what if that noise isn't the problem? What if noticing the noise is part of the awakening itself? In Mahayana Buddhism, it's said that the very awareness that sees the distraction is already enlightened. That insight changes everything. There's a beautiful teaching in Zen that says the harder you chase the Buddha, the further away he seems. But the moment you stop running and just sit in presence, you discover that the Buddha you were chasing is actually the one watching from within you. That's the paradox. The more effort you apply to become spiritual, the more distant it feels. But the moment you let go of trying to become and simply be, something shifts. That presence, that quiet awareness, that's what the Buddha was pointing to all along. Of course, this doesn't mean meditation becomes passive. It still takes courage to sit with yourself, especially when the mind is turbulent or the heart feels heavy. But the intention changes. You're no longer meditating to fix a broken self. You're meditating to remember a whole self. You're not trying to reach a peak. You're just removing the fog. The effort is gentle, not forced. It's more about trust than control. And when you meditate from that space, from knowing your true nature is already pure, something magical happens. You stop taking your thoughts so personally. You stop judging yourself so harshly. You begin to recognize that beneath all the movement of the mind there is a vast stillness. And that stillness isn't something you achieve, it's who you've always been. We spend so much of our lives trying to prove ourselves, to be seen, to be accepted, to be enough, whether it's in relationships, careers, or even in our own spiritual journey. There's this deep, quiet belief that we need to earn our worth, that somehow when we become better, more disciplined, more spiritual, then we'll finally be worthy of love, peace, and belonging. But what if this whole premise is backwards? What if the Buddha was trying to show us that we've been looking through the wrong lens all along? In the teachings of Buddhism, there's this luminous concept called Buddha nature. It isn't something you gain over time. It isn't reserved for monks or spiritual masters. It isn't unlocked through suffering or years of meditation. It's something you already have right now as you are. The Buddha taught that every sentient being carries this same enlightened essence. It doesn't matter how lost or broken you feel. It doesn't matter what mistakes you've made. Beneath all the layers of fear, pain, and confusion, there's a core of pure awareness, untouched and undamaged. This doesn't mean we ignore our flaws or avoid growth. It means that transformation begins when we stop believing we are fundamentally broken. You see, most of our efforts to change are driven by the idea that we're not good enough. But when you approach practice from that mindset, you're always chasing a future version of yourself, a version that's calmer, wiser, more peaceful, and in that chase you miss what's already here. The Buddha's insight was that you don't need to become something else, you need to remember what you already are. Now here's where this becomes even more beautiful. If you have Buddha nature, so does everyone else. That person who irritated you last week, that person who betrayed you, yes, even them. This doesn't mean you have to tolerate bad behavior or pretend pain doesn't exist. It means you stop reducing people to their worst moments, because at their core, beneath their ignorance, confusion, and pain, they also carry the same spark, the same jewel under the dirt. The Buddha didn't just teach compassion because it's a good moral idea. He taught it because when you recognize your own true nature, you begin to see it reflected in others. This doesn't mean becoming passive or naive. In fact, it makes you stronger, because you no longer react from ego or fear. You respond from clarity. You can set boundaries without hatred. You can walk away without bitterness. You can forgive without needing to forget. Why? Because you understand the deeper truth. No matter how someone behaves, they're still walking the same path you are. Maybe behind you, maybe ahead of you, but still walking it. Most of us live with a quiet belief that our life hasn't really started yet. We tell ourselves that once we get the promotion, once we're in the right relationship, once we finally fix ourselves, that's when peace will come, that's when we'll finally be okay. But that kind of thinking is a trap, one that keeps joy and contentment dangling in front of us like a carrot we never quite reach. It's exhausting, it's endless. And worst of all, it blinds us to the beauty that already surrounds us right now, in this very moment. The Buddha warned us about this mind that constantly grasps for the future while rejecting the present. He called it tanha, craving, and he said it's the root of suffering. You see, we confuse growth with escape. We believe that the person we are right now isn't enough, that we have to become someone different in order to deserve peace. But Buddhist wisdom flips that completely. It teaches us that true freedom isn't found in changing who we are. It's found in seeing clearly. And what we begin to see when we slow down and look deeply is that there's nothing wrong with us at all. The problem is not our nature, it's the stories we've layered on top of it. It's the belief that we are broken, unworthy, or incomplete. But those are just clouds. Beneath them, the sky has always been clear. Buddha nature isn't something you earn after years of effort. It's not something waiting at the finish line of your spiritual journey. It's already here. It's what's reading these words. It's what's watching your thoughts come and go. The present moment isn't empty, it's full of sacredness. The breath you're taking now, the awareness of it, that is awakening. That's why the Buddha emphasized mindfulness so deeply. Because when we return to now, we're not just grounding ourselves, we're remembering who we are. There's a calm that comes from realizing you don't have to chase yourself anymore. You don't have to fix what was never broken. You don't have to wait for enlightenment like it's some prize given only to the most disciplined. Awakening is simply the recognition of what's been here all along. It's the moment when seeking drops away. It's the moment you stop trying to become and start being. When your shoulders relax, when your breath deepens, when your presence returns, that's the sacred shift. That's when life stops being a project to manage and becomes something to embrace. There's a point on the path where words start to feel too small, like they're trying to hold something too vast, too intimate, too sacred. You can talk about Buddha nature all day, study the sutras, understand the metaphors, even quote the masters. But at some point you realize none of it quite captures the experience itself. And that's not a flaw in the teachings. It's exactly what the Buddha intended. Because the truth he pointed to was never meant to be merely understood. It was meant to be seen, felt, lived. The Buddha often reminded his followers that his teachings were like a finger pointing at the moon. The teachings help us orient ourselves. They show us where to look. But if we become obsessed with the finger, we'll miss the moon. In the same way, Buddha nature isn't a concept to believe in. It's an experience to recognize. That moment when your mind goes still, when you're not trying to become anything, when you're just quietly aware, that's it. That silent, spacious presence underneath your thinking mind. That's what the teachings have been pointing to all along. In modern times, neuroscientists and philosophers have tried to describe this kind of awareness. Some call it pure consciousness or baseline awareness. It's the presence that's still there during deep meditation, during sleep, and even, surprisingly, under anesthesia. They can measure brain waves, monitor responses, study what's happening in the mind, but even they admit there's something mysterious here. Something you can't fully explain with scans and language, because it's not a thing you observe, it's the one who is observing. The Buddha knew this long before science caught on. That's why he used metaphors and silence more than lectures. When a student asked about ultimate truth, sometimes he didn't answer at all. Not because he didn't know, but because any answer would trap the listener in the mind. The experience of Buddha nature is before thought. It's what's noticing the thought. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You can't look at it directly, but it's always there, quietly aware. You don't need to go to a monastery to experience this. It can happen in the middle of your day. Washing dishes, sitting in traffic, listening to music. That moment when time slows, when your breath becomes steady, and you feel completely at peace without needing anything else. That's Buddha nature shining through. It was never far away. It was just quiet, waiting for you to notice. Most of us spend our lives in a quiet state of chasing success, chasing peace, chasing a version of ourselves we believe will finally feel complete. We tell ourselves, once I fix this, or once I overcome that, then I'll be whole. But what if this idea, this constant reaching, is the very thing pulling us away from what we seek? The Buddha didn't teach us to strive endlessly. He taught us to stop, to become still, and to see. Because the answer isn't in the next achievement or the next breakthrough. It's in the awareness that's watching all of it unfold. There's something beautifully humbling in realizing that the one who is observing your search is the one you've been searching for. The Buddha called this your true nature, pure, undisturbed, and ever-present. Not something you need to become, but something you already are. It's not hidden in a cave or a temple. It's not revealed after 10,000 hours of meditation or in the pages of sacred texts. It's the awareness reading these words, the quiet presence behind your thoughts, the gentle space that notices joy, pain, confusion, and clarity alike, without clinging to any of it. The great masters didn't awaken because they added something to themselves. They awakened by realizing what was always there. The Zen master Huangbo once said, "The only thing that obstructs your view is the fact that you're trying to see it." This is the paradox that makes Buddha nature so hard to grasp with the mind. It can't be possessed like a thing. It can only be recognized like a mirror, recognizing its reflection. And here's where many people get stuck. They say, okay, I understand that I'm already enlightened deep down, but I still feel anxious. I still react with anger. I still forget myself. But Buddha never said you wouldn't experience those things. He said those things don't define you. The clouds may cover the sky, but they don't change the sky. When you suffer, when you stumble, when you forget, your Buddha nature remains untouched, always present, always still, always free. This is why meditation isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming still enough to remember. Each breath is a doorway. Each moment of silence is a mirror. When you sit quietly, not chasing peace, not resisting discomfort, you begin to sense something steady underneath it all. That's the recognition the Buddha spoke of. And it doesn't come with fireworks, it comes with a gentle shift, like remembering something you never truly forgot. What if the peace you've been chasing has been silently walking beside you all along, not as something to achieve, but as something to remember? You were never broken, you were just distracted from your own light. Thank you for walking this path with me today. If something in your heart stirred, let it guide you deeper. And if you're ready to keep exploring the quiet brilliance of your Buddha nature, there's another video waiting for you on the screen, one that might just open the next door. Thank you for being a part of Buddhist Journey.